Yeah, yeah, don't worry. We're good? In 1258, the Mongol army invaded the city of Baghdad. And after killing everybody in the city, which included philosophers and scientists, they realized that this just wasn't enough. They wanted to make sure that they committed something that would ensure that these people that they had invaded would even struggle with the thought of recovery. So, they went after their libraries. They went after their books. They went after their source of knowledge. It is said that on that day, either all the books were burned or thrown into the river, so much so that the river Tigris turned black because of the ink from these books. And when I heard the story for the first time, it made me immensely sad, but not in a remote intellectual manner. It made me sad because I suddenly began thinking about us. We don't need an army to come in and invade us. Our libraries are already abandoned. The books within them are collecting dust, and we have already forgotten the knowledge that was passed down to us. But you know, the important question to ask over here is that why does any of this actually matter? You know, why should we care about any of this? And to answer that, I'm going to share, as soon as this works, the next slide, please. Thank you. Yes. Something of a personal story over here. So this is almost 6 years ago. I had recently graduated. And you know, when you have recently graduated, you have just finished your bachelor's, you're very energetic, you're very optimistic, you really think that you can solve all the problems in the world. And you often wonder, you know, the problems of the world are so simple, why isn't anybody solving them? So you can call that stupidity or being naive or whatever, but I was definitely like that. But what was interesting was that every time I went up to somebody with an idea, with a thought, with a question, I got some phenomenal responses, which included the likes of, Beta, you know, things just don't change over here. Beta, the system is really bad. Beta, are you stupid? Why are you even thinking along these lines? And perhaps my favorite, this place has no future. And this is from, you know, uncles and aunties we all know, of course. And to be perfectly honest, I didn't know what to say to them. And I don't know much, but from what I do understand, one of the most important things for a young mind is encouragement. But what was even sadder was that these people I was talking to, it just seemed like they had completely given up hope. And I just didn't know what to say to them. To be quite honest, I believed them. This picture of our past that they were painting also made me think that the future was bleak. But slowly, things began to change. I work in publishing at this publishing house called Sang-e-Meel Publications, and I didn't realize it at that time, but now I consider it a blessing that part of my job is to read a lot. And so I was just working, and in that process, I started reading a lot of the local books that had been published over here. And by God, I was genuinely impressed because I found myself engrossed in fantastic stories from our region. And, you know, I came across questions of ethics, philosophy, politics, things that our society deals with on a daily basis. These questions included the issues that, for example, a family faces when it wants to move up the socioeconomic chain in our society. Or what are the challenges that a son faces when he needs to move out of his home either for better livelihood or for better education? Or what are the questions that he has to answer when on one side is a better future and on the other side is his family waiting? What are the issues of the women of this country who have built this country with the men and at the same time they are not acknowledged? What are the issues that daughters face within this country who want a voice, who want to go forward, and yet our society is not conducive for that? We have books like Udas Naslein, which is written by Abdullah Hussain, a fantastic novel about the experiences that families had during partition. And these aren't just experiences in terms of practical or a financial sense. What was the impact of that experience on them psychologically? And then you have writers like Mushtaq Ahmed Yusufi or Shafiqur Rahman, who have written brilliant, brilliant satire. And then there are people like Habib Jalib and Faiz Ahmed Faiz, who stood for something, who stood for ideologies, who moved people, who gave people a vision. And then there are classic tales like Talism Hoshuba, which is known as one of the best pieces of literature in Urdu language. And then there are women writers like Kurratulain Haider, Bano Kutsia, Kishwar Nahid, who have been writing about the women and the daughters of this country for the last 3 or 4 decades. And that list goes on and on and on. So, I had come across a treasure trove. And one thing was very clear to me, that this picture of our past that had been painted for me was incorrect. And I'm not trying to say that our society does not have issues. It certainly does. But my question to all of you is, which society doesn't have issues? Every society does. But what is different is, while societies acknowledge their failures, they also celebrate their successes, something that I feel we have forgotten to do. So now, more than ever, we need to go back to our books. But we're facing a different challenge as well. We've also begun to forget our language. So if you were to think of language as a vessel of ideas, then books are where you store these ideas. But if I were to take away that language from you, then those ideas are as good as lost. And when you lose your language, you lose an understanding of your intellectual depth and history. You don't quite know where you are anymore. And then you look towards others for guidance and for a sense of direction. And this has been happening a lot. So we've started doing this in almost every scenario. For business, we constantly look towards Europe or the US, or most recently the Silicon Valley. So much so that we've actually even started taking recommendations from them about what we should read from our culture. And this is a fantastic example of this. There's this book called Muqaddimah by this man called Ibn Khaldun. Now this book is important because it is one of the foundational texts of what we today call social sciences. It was the first book of its kind that actually focused on the history of the world and tried to understand patterns across time and space. The interesting thing is that this book is easily available in Lahore at any bookstore, but most people don't know about this. 2 years ago, there's this man called Mark Zuckerberg, who is the CEO of a very small social media company. He recommended it as part of his book club. It's fantastic, but still, it's just ironic that we had to learn about this book from him. And then there's Rumi. It is, I think, on some level fantastic that Rumi had to travel all the way to the West, get translated over there, and then come back over here so that we could take pieces of his poetry and post it on Facebook to sound inspirational. And that, I think, in some ways is at least ironic, if not sad. But don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to say, and I can't emphasize this enough, I'm not trying to say that this is about East versus West. This isn't about English versus Urdu. In fact, I think it's absolutely brilliant that the works of these people, that such languages and such books are being acknowledged all over the world. And we should absolutely learn from wherever we can in the world. But my question to you is that if the world is comfortable in acknowledging what is good about our history, then why do we continue to ignore it? Because ignoring it leads to a much deeper problem. When you forget your own intellectual history, when you don't acknowledge the depth of your own culture, you end up with intellectual slavery. When you're constantly learning what the world is telling you without really contributing something on your own, you might be great at it. You might be at the top of your table. But you're still an intellectual slave. You might be the best slave. But that doesn't change the fact that you're still a slave. And at the end of the day, when you go out into the world without an understanding of who you are, The world constantly asks you, okay, what are you bringing to the table? And my understanding or my belief is that if we were to actually understand who we are, then we can actually take a lot to that table. While I was working on this talk, this particular verse from Iqbal, kept resonating with me. And it translates something along the lines of, free your mind from slavery, make the young mentors of the old. And this was said a few decades ago, and this is still the struggle that we have. Unless you can free yourself from these shackles, unless we can understand who we are, unless we can recognize our own potential, it would be very, very difficult for us to even think of building a future. That future will always, always be alien to us if we don't understand where we're coming from. Lastly, I would just like to say that our libraries are still standing. They're merely collecting dust. Our books haven't been burnt. They haven't been thrown into a river yet. So we still have time. So my request to you today is, just go pick up a book. Go read about who you are, recognize your own potential, understand where you're coming from. And maybe, just go and talk to the people who are in charge of these institutions, these libraries, and ask them, demand that I want to understand what is good about us. Because maybe then we can reach a point where we can start building again. Because all these people that I mentioned today, they're gone. They're in the past. Yes, absolutely, we should read and understand what they have written. But at the same time, it is you and I who have to build the future. And unless we understand where we are and what our capability is, it will be very, very difficult to do that. So my hope is that in 10 or 20 years, when all of us are uncles and aunties, and a kid comes up to us with an idea or a thought or a question, then at least we can say, the future is yours. Thank you very much.